Today's story took place in a small town in China. On TV, they were witnessing the huge technological advances that the capital and other cities were experiencing. However, they didn't even know about mobile phones yet, and even though there were some cars in that town, they were pretty old, and it was uncommon to own one there. The town didn't have a hospital either, and the streets needed to be paved and cleaned. Because of that, the townsfolk started to complain. They were fed up of being treated as if they didn't matter and thought that all the government wanted was to benefit from their huge rice fields. They stopped working to protest in the streets instead until they got what they demanded. The government then decided to invest into modernizing the town and thus please the people there. And so the roads soon started to get paved and the broken sidewalks were being replaced to be more pretty and functional. In 1 year, the government built new parks, renovated the school, and built a small hospital with enough equipment to help the townsfolk. This created a lot of new jobs, and the families in the town started to live better. However, the news that really got the townsfolk excited was that the government would also build a subway station for the town. For years, they all depended on one single bus, which took hours traveling through a route which could be traveled in way less time. The townsfolk would finally be able to travel to other cities and travel long distances without wasting so much time. Moreover, that would increase tourism in the town and with it the sales of local businesses. However, one night, after the construction of the station got started, a group of young students looking for thrills decided to break into the unfinished station. They saw a hole in the security fence and so took advantage of that to get in. They spent a few hours in the construction site until one of the students had the idea of playing hide and seek. It was very dark and there were enough structures around for the game to be interesting. Little Wen, who was afraid of the dark, didn't know where to hide, so she decided to not go very far. And so when she looked around and saw the subway tracks, she didn't hesitate to hide there. However, the moment she grabbed a light pole to not lose her balance, the pole collapsed and one of the beams on the ceiling fell on her head. The rest of the group heard the rumbling followed by an agonizing scream and rushed to see what happened. They saw their friend lying on the ground with a huge injury on her head and her body shaking. They got so scared that they all left, abandoning Wen in that cold place, assuming she was dead. When they crossed the hole of the fence to get out, they promised to each other to never tell anybody about what happened. The next day, when the workers arrived at the construction site, they found Wen's corpse. The light pole had collapsed and with it one of the beams on the ceiling. They called the police and officers soon arrived at the unfinished station. One of the agents quickly recognized Wen. She was the daughter of the town's most beloved teacher. The news was so shocking that all of the townsfolk went to the girl's funeral. They felt so bad that they asked the government to please stop building the station as a way of showing respect for Wen and her family. They didn't like the idea of hundreds of people walking every day through the same place where an innocent little girl died in such a tragic way, and thus the construction of the station was halted. However, at the end of the day, that was a necessary project to drive forward the growth of the country. And so, 10 years later, the construction of the station resumed. The townsfolk had already gotten over the previous tragedy, and the basic infrastructure was relatively intact, which would save the government a fair share of money. At the time, May would get up every day at 4 a.m. to get to her job, located in the nearest city. She was a manager in a bar, and even though she had no time for herself, she needed the money to take care of her parents, who were sick and old. She would get out of her house at 5 a.m. before sunrise to get to the bus stop and spend many hours in the bus until finally arriving at her destination. But most of the time, she would fall asleep in her seat out of exhaustion. Her shift ended pretty late and she had to use the same mode of transportation to get back home. She could only sleep about 3.5 hours per night. Because of that, when she heard the news that the construction of the subway station was resuming, she felt especially excited and hopeful. And her parents were worried about her health. She was getting thinner and thinner, constantly had bags under her eyes, and was smiling less and less. Even May herself admitted that sometimes she felt she had no energy left. But now, by using the new subway, she would save 2 hours going to work and 2 hours coming back, which would really help her improve her routine. Thanks to all the time she would save, May would finally sleep more and would be able to see her friends again. She hadn't seen them after getting her job at the bar. Then one day, while she was working, she saw a special report on the news. The subway station finally had a definitive inauguration date, which would be the Monday of the next week. She kept in mind that she only needed to endure her current routine a few more days, and her life would finally change for the better. During that week, even though she still slept little and had to wake up so early, she had a better mood throughout the day. She would imagine the many things she would be able to do with her newfound free time. That drove her to do her job with much more enthusiasm, despite the tiredness. She felt mentally prepared for a new stage in her life where she would finally be much happier, and she was looking forward to it starting as soon as possible. The night before the inauguration, May went to bed crying of happiness. She got up 3 hours later than usual and was one of the first passengers that would take a train at the station. However, once May went into the station, a strong shiver went down her entire body. She no longer felt comfortable. She felt that something was wrong. She didn't know why she was feeling that way and wondered if maybe she was getting ill after not sleeping well for so long. And once she put her foot in the wagon, she understood what was happening. She was part of the group who witnessed Wen's demise so many years ago. May and Wen were great friends back then. May started to cry, blaming herself for Wen's death. May felt horrible for abandoning Wen while she endured an agonizing death. May didn't even remember clearly everything that happened since that event really traumatized her. She spent the entire trip feeling terrible, thinking about little Wen's family and how their lives would be if she had done the right thing when she could. May also pondered about what happened to all the others that were with her that night. 30 minutes later, the train arrived to its destination. May got off the train and took in the fresh air, although her eyes were still filled with tears. She then told herself that there was nothing she could do to change the past and continued walking. May went into the bar, and from the beginning she was doing her task way more efficiently than before. But then, after her lunch break, the memories of Wen's death started to torment her again. May continued working until she couldn't hold it anymore and had to lock herself in the bathroom to cry. How could so many years go by without her remembering what happened? She felt so horrible about herself that she wasn't even capable of looking at herself in the mirror. May eventually calmed down, continued working, and finished her shift. She changed her clothes and prepared to go back home. She looked at the clock and saw that she had enough time to get the last train home, so she rushed to the station to not miss it. She arrived sweating, even though it was wintertime. She had a short shirt and it was already dark. May then realized that the subway station of that city was particularly scary at night. Nobody was there, and the infrastructure was very old and unkempt. If anyone had told her that that station had been abandoned for years, she would have believed them. She spent a long while waiting, even though the schedule showed that the train should have arrived already. If the train didn't arrive, she would have to find a way to spend the night in the city, since the bus she usually took had already departed. Suddenly, May felt a slight rumble, which meant that the train was coming. She took out her ticket from her purse, ready to give it to the ticket collector. The vehicle stopped and she went in, feeling relieved. However, May's expression changed when she realized she was completely alone in the train. Not knowing why, her heart started beating faster and she started to get really nervous. The lights in the train also started to flicker, preventing her from reading her book in peace. Since nobody was there, May decided to lay down in a few seats. She felt how the exhaustion was starting to take over her, and even though she was trying not to fall asleep, she spent the entire day working and thought that a little rest would be pretty nice. However, May was jolted awake when the train stopped in its tracks. Suddenly, the lights in the wagon went out. She started to scream to see if the driver would hear her and look for her. The lights soon went back on, and when they did, May could see how something was dragging itself next to the wagon's door. It was a little girl. Her hair was covering her face. She got up, and with one hand, she pushed away the hair on her face to reveal herself. It was Wen. The undead girl slowly walked towards May, constantly repeating, "You could have saved me. You all killed me." All May could think of doing was shut down her eyes as hard as she could. She woke up lying on the train seats. She had a nightmare so realistic that her hands and legs were shaking. The lights in the wagon were working fine as well. So, trying to calm down, May took out her book from her purse. When she looked at the clock, looking forward to getting home, she saw she would reach her destination in about 15 minutes. She kept reading her book and immersed herself in the story, unaware of anything happening around her. She started hearing strange noises, but decided to ignore them. Then the vehicle started to tremble so hard that it felt as if it was about to get derailed, which took May out of her trance. That's when she also realized that the windows were all fogged. Suddenly, she saw a few lit lamps at the end of the rails. The driver said through the megaphone that that was the last stop and said goodnight, but not before thanking his only passenger for using their services. The door opened and May was puzzled when she heard a peculiar sound around her. It sounded like someone crying. She looked to her left and saw a little girl sitting on the tracks, crying. May quickly approached her to see if she could help her. In that moment, the little girl turned around, and May could see up close the diabolical red eyes of a wrathful Wen. May rushed out of there, going up the station stairs as she was being chased. But when she tried to get out, she found that the station's door was locked. Wen started to cackle, and May screamed so loudly that she alerted the only security guard in the station. He illuminated the station's door with his lantern and found a woman crying, hid in the door, and who was all alone. Noticing the light, May turned around and threw herself to the guard. Hugging him, she wept as she thanked him for helping her. The guard, weirded out, decided to escort May to her house and ask her to rest well. He thought she was crazy, but took pity on her. That night, May locked herself in a room and didn't meet with her friends. She decided to never use the subway again and fell asleep as she muled about what happened. The next morning, she slept in since she forgot to set up her alarm clock. She had no option but to go back to the station. However, there were a lot of people there that day, which made her feel relieved. She saw a few acquaintances, and talking to them made the trip more pleasant. When May ended her shift, she tried taking the bus she always used to take. Unfortunately, she could only see how it passed in front of her since the driver didn't stop to pick her up. And so May had no other option but to take the subway again, and at nighttime, which made her feel terrified. When May arrived at the station, she saw that there was another woman waiting for the train. It was a nice old lady who was also going to her town. The lady told May that she was going to visit her newborn granddaughter for the first time. When the train arrived, they sat together and kept talking during the trip. However, May still felt fearful, mulling about what happened the night before. The old lady asked May how long it would take before they arrived at the station, and she said they were about 5 minutes away. Then, May realized that the old lady's expression was getting really strange. The woman was staring at May unblinkingly with an eerie smile on her face. Then the old woman made a strange movement and started pulling her own hair with such force that she tore out a strand of it. She kept doing this, tearing out pieces of her own skin until her true identity was revealed. It was Wen, in a fleshy disguise, who started bawling and demanding to know why did May and the others abandon her. Paralyzed in horror, May didn't respond, resulting in Wen's eyes becoming red and her teeth falling out one by one as she smiled. And holding her gaze on May, she bid her farewell by saying, "See you in hell." The train got derailed just before reaching the station, and it exploded so strongly that it demolished a few walls. From under the rubble, all they could find was May's corpse, which was completely scorched from head to toe. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode!